Well, since this network and other news organizations called the presidential election on Saturday, November 7th, 2020, every day of Donald Trump's life has been worse than the day before. Today is $464 million worse than yesterday for Donald Trump and his children. There was no suspense, really, in today's judicial finding in the civil fraud case brought against Donald Trump by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Jury verdicts are always suspenseful. You never know what juries are thinking, but it was always very clear what the fact finder in this case, Judge Arthur Engoron, was thinking. It was very clear what any reasonable person would think when confronted with the evidence in this case. In his ruling today, which cost Donald Trump and his children $463.9 million, including interest, Judge Engoron wrote, in order to borrow more and at lower rates, defendants submitted blatantly false financial data to the accountants, resulting in fraudulent financial statements. When confronted at trial with the statements, defendants, fact and expert witnesses simply denied reality, and defendants failed to accept responsibility or to impose internal controls to prevent future recurrences. That's the essence of the case. So, as of tonight, because of Donald Trump's stupidity and recklessness as a businessman, and because of Donald Trump's utter depravity in raping E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s, Donald Trump owes a total of $551 million in legally enforceable judgments against him in the state of New York. And the interest is ticking on that total amount every day that it remains unpaid. That means the interest on what Donald Trump owes in this case, won by Attorney General Letitia James, and in the the two cases, one by E. Jean Carroll, is increasing at a rate of $1 million per week. That's the interest right now that's running on what Donald Trump owes in all of these cases, $1 million a week. To appeal those cases in the state of New York, Donald Trump has to literally put up or shut up. He has to put up the money in question in order to appeal the New York cases. So Donald Trump has exactly 22 days left before he must deposit the $83 million that he owes E. Jean Carroll in an account controlled by the court so that he can appeal that case. If he loses that appeal, that $83 million immediately goes to E. Jean Carroll. She won't have to chase Donald Trump for the money. Donald Trump has already deposited the $5 million in an account controlled by the court while he is appealing the first verdict against E. Jean Carroll that E. Jean Carroll won in court. Donald Trump has 30 days to deposit $463 million in an account controlled by the court so that he can appeal this business fraud case. Tonight, Donald Trump needs the kind of $2 billion surge of Saudi money into his business that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, got from the Saudis after the Trump presidency. If foreign sources of money like that don't bail out Donald Trump, it is unlikely that the Trump businesses will experience a surge of income that is able to absorb the $500 million in legal judgments that Donald Trump now faces, with hundreds of millions of dollars in legal judgments likely to land on him in the lawsuits pending against him in Washington, D.C., filed by police officers for the injuries that they suffered at the hands of the violent Trump mob on January 6th. Donald Trump will be barred from running businesses in the state of New York for 3 years. His two children, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, will be barred from running businesses in New York for 2 years. After crushing the Trump boys and their business in court today, New York Attorney General Letitia James said this.
I want to be clear. White-collar financial fraud is not a victimless crime. When the powerful break the law and take more than their fair share, there are fewer resources available for working people, small businesses, and families. And everyday Americans cannot lie to a bank about how much money they have in order to get a mortgage to buy a home, or a loan to keep their business afloat, or to send their child to college. And if they did, our government would throw the book at them. I want to thank the entire incredible and hardworking team in my office that tried this case, because the scale and the scope of Donald Trump's fraud is staggering. And so too is his ego and his belief that the rules do not apply to him. Today, we are holding Donald Trump accountable. We are holding him accountable for lying, cheating, and a lack of contrition, and for flouting the rules that all of us must play by. Because there cannot be different rules for different people in this country, and former presidents are no exception. This decision is a massive victory for every American who believes in that simple but fundamental pillar of our democracy, that the rule of law applies to all of us, equally, fairly, and justly. Thank you.
We are going to go inside Donald Trump's businesses with our experts tonight. Tim O'Brien, senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion and author of Trump Nation. He is an MSNBC political analyst. David K. Johnson, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. He is the author of The Big Cheat: How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. Faith Gay, who served as a supervisor in the Special Prosecutors and Civil Rights Unit of the Eastern District of New York. And Suzanne Craig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for the New York Times. And Suzanne, you reminded me of another, I left out of this well over $500 million burden that Donald Trump is facing. He owes you some money, doesn't he?
Well, I almost forgot about it in all the hubbub today, but he owes the New York Times legal fees for suing us over a story about him that ran in 2018 that won the Pulitzer Prize, and our portion of the lawsuit was tossed out, and he's been ordered to pay our legal fees. We're still waiting. Which
run about $400,000. And
yeah.
He hasn't paid. What? I don't get it.
He's got the same. He's got to either appeal it, put the money up. The
All right, so now, are you worried about the New York Times getting its $400,000 now that there's more than $500 million in front of you
yeah.
that people are trying to collect?
There's a lot, isn't there now? It's incredible. Yeah.
So what does Donald Trump have to do to get the money he needs just to mount the appeal?
We don't know quite yet, because we don't know exactly how much cash he has on hand. You know, that's a snapshot of any given day, how much he could have. He's claimed that he has $400 million. That was last year. He could have more now. He could have less now. But we do know that during his presidency, it wasn't as talked about, but there was a lot of asset sales that happened. Mm-hmm. As he entered the White House, he was in a precarious situation with his cash. 2015 happened when he announced he was running for president. He made very disparaging remarks against Mexicans. And a lot of his licensing deals left. They all abandoned ship, and those were a real cash cow for him. They produced their one-time payments that he was getting that just disappeared. And he also lost the Apprentice franchise. NBC also walked away from him on Miss Universe. So he enters the White House. He has a meeting with Alan Weiselberg, his accountant, and there's difficulty with the cash, and there's not that much left. But we do know that since then, he has sold the operating agreements that he had on the old post office hotel in Washington. Mm-hmm. He also sold the operating license for a golf course that he had in New York. And he's also sold gotten less publicity, but some condos that he owned in New York. He sold a mansion in Beverly Hills. I can keep going down the list. So he's been raising cash, but at the same time, we don't know how much money he's having to plug into his many money-losing businesses just to keep them going. So it's sort of a hard thing, but we do know that he has been quietly sort of, I think, building up the cash supply. Can he meet this decision today, either to pay it or to put up money so that he can appeal on top of the E. Jean Carroll decision? These are massive amounts of money for him. I think we're looking at, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I don't know, and I think we're probably going to have a situation where he's going to have to put up a bond, and how he's even going to get that, given all the trouble he is in now, is anybody's guess. Well,
no one's going to give that guy a bond after this. All right, let's listen. This is 30 seconds of Donald Trump under oath. Let's all listen to this because it has to be true because it's under oath. And it's Donald Trump telling us how much cash he has on hand right now. We will evaluate the credibility of this. But as I say, it's under oath, so it has to be true. Let's listen to this.
I don't need the money. You probably see the cash. We have a lot of cash. I believe we have substantially in excess of 400 million cash, which is a lot for a developer. Developers usually don't have cash. They have assets, not cash. But we have, I believe, 400 plus and going up very substantially every month. My biggest expense is probably legal fees. But fortunately, that's okay. But we have a lot of cash. We have great assets. And we have a very valuable company.
Okay, so we know he's lying about the legal fees because he makes his contributors pay for that. But Tim O'Brien, he's under oath, so it's got to be true, right?
You've got to believe him, Lawrence. You know, I sort of relish the idea of Sue Craig and the New York Times filing a lien against Trump Tower to make sure they get paid at the end of the day. You know, my colleagues at Bloomberg News have estimated he has around 600 million. If it's 400 million, if it's 3, if it's 7, the reality is the size of these judgments cumulatively are going to blow a giant hole in his wallet. And I don't think, you know, he has liquid assets, which would be cash, securities, other things that he could raise money by selling quickly. I don't think that'll meet most of his immediate needs around these penalties. As Sue said, you don't know. He's a privately held enterprise. So we have to rely on his own public statements. But it's likely that he may have to sell some of his hard assets, and most of his wealth is tied up in a handful of urban skyscrapers and some golf courses. And the urban skyscrapers have been stressed because of COVID. People have been fleeing city centers, and then other real estate buyers know Trump's under duress. So he may have to sell those things at fire sale prices. It's a horrible situation for him to be in financially. And then there's the added, I think, psychological and reputational wound of being put into exile from New York for 3 years. And Trump talks a lot about his legacy. You know, he likes to compare himself to other famous families. And the Trumps aren't the Roosevelts or the Kennedys or the Vanderbilts or the Rockefellers. They're a sort of a dime store version of that. But he pays a lot of attention to that. And I think there's no way that this ruling also doesn't just strike a blow to his sense of himself as a New Yorker. For as much as he dumps on the city, he has always considered himself a New Yorker. The Donald Trump that we saw, rise up in the 1980s through the 90s and thereafter was initially a creation of his father's wealth, his father Fred's wealth. And Trump has just gone around with a sledgehammer and taken it to the foundations of the family's business and his own business in the pursuit of whatever he wants to do. And now people are asking for receipts. And he's not been in this position before. This myth that Donald Trump has escaped the long arm of the law forever and ever. He has never been subjected to the kind of prosecutorial talent and zeal that's confronting him right now. And then the antics that he engaged in the court that pleased his political base, but obviously irked judges who are hearing those cases. And they've come after him with as much, I think, force as they could. I was surprised that Engoron laid a financial penalty on him of this size. I thought he was going to exile him completely from New York and then go with a lighter financial penalty. And I think that that's all a reflection of how tired the courts are of what he's trying to do as he abuses the rule of law.
Faith Gay, what does the appeals process look like for Donald Trump, and what does he have to do to comply with it? And obviously, he has to put up in New York, you have to put up the money to run an appeal. It's a pretty big burden.
Yeah, you have to put up a bond that's usually about 120% of what the judgment is. So we're talking huge amounts of money here, Lawrence, more than $500 million. And I would say this judgment is pretty appeal-proof. He'll have a shot at the Intermediate Court of Appeals, and then there's a discretionary shot at the state's highest court, the Court of Appeals. But Judge Engoron really went out of his way to support his judgment, and it's a simple case. In New York, you lose the right to do business in the world's financial capital, New York City, if you engage in a persistent pattern of dishonesty. And that's what happens here. When you do that, and when the judge finds that, two things happen. You give back the money that you obtained by dishonesty, and you're barred, blocked from doing business. Here, the judge put in what are really mainstream penalties. He enhanced Judge Jones, who's the monitor, her powers. So Donald Trump can no longer, through his companies, run them. He can't issue fraudulent financial statements. The judge, who's the monitor, will check them first. The judge put in a mandatory compliance officer, and he gave a pretty modest penalty, as was pointed out here, of 3 years barring business for Donald Trump in New York and 2 years for his sons. Those are proportionate penalties. I think given the massive findings of fact and credibility determinations that the judge made, this is going to be a very difficult decision for Trump to attack.
David, does this mean now that there are, in effect, supervisors of the Trump business overseeing the whole thing, does this mean we're going to get a new financial picture of what the Trump businesses actually are?
Yes. The independent director who will effectively run the company because he'll control large movements of money, and the requirement for pre-approval of any large transaction. They can pay salaries and ordinary vendor bills, but because they, while under the supervision of Judge Jones, did all sorts of improper money movements, they have to now get pre-approval, and there will have to be accountings to the court about all of this. And that's going to very much hamper Donald's style. He did get one nice thing, courtesy of Governor Kathy Hochul and the state.
I don't need anybody's money. It's nice. I don't need anybody's money. I'm using my own money. I'm not using the lobbyists. I'm not using donors. I don't care. I'm really rich.
Turns out that was all a lie. We are about to find out if Donald Trump is rich enough to handle what is now over $500 million in legal judgments against him just this month in New York State. The New York Attorney General's case against Donald Trump ended today in a judgment of $464 million against him and his children. And here is how and where it began.
I want to ask a little bit about your conversation with my colleague from Missouri about asset inflation. To your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
And where would the committee find more information on this? Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes, and you'd find it at the Trump org.
Our Trump business experts are back with us. Tim O'Brien, David K. Johnston, Faith Gay, and Suzanne Craig. Suzanne, so Letitia James took that handoff from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and here we are.
And here we are, right? It's incredible. That's one of the where it started.
Yeah, with Michael Cohen as the key, the person who did the key turning over of the cards to get this started.
Right.
Yeah.
And since then, it's just been an unraveling that's, really spectacular. I mean, we worked on a story that ran in 2008 that looked at some of these things, some of the games they were playing with valuations that go all the way back to his father. I mean, that's where it started. And then to see it all the way come forward to today, it's just remarkable.
Tim O'Brien, it's an indication of, by the way, it's one of the reasons why I thought Donald Trump would never run for president, because the level of scrutiny that is possible and that is likely to occur into his private life and his business life is something he couldn't survive. As Suzanne just mentioned, he survived a 2008 look by the New York Times at this kind of thing. But when, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does that, on TV with Michael Cohen, and the New York State Attorney General is watching, up in New York, watching that. That's it. You've unlocked a door, and there are very powerful forces who are going to go investigate at that point.
Well, lesson one is pay your lawyers, and then don't leave your lawyers hanging out to dry. when your lawyers have had a look at some of your deals with banks and your books and the deals that you're conducting inside your office on Fifth Avenue. And that's another thing. You know, Trump historically has stiffed his attorneys without suffering some of the blowback from that other people would. He went through decades of journalists combing through his finances, writing approximations of Letitia James's argument decades before.
Right.
And he kept skating along. And I think, and it is because of this hubris. I think he decided he had run for president before too, but obviously he had never won. And I think the scrutiny was intensified, but it wasn't until he began randomly breaking the law that the heat got turned up. And as we talked about before, he's simply in a position he's never been used to, and he's trying to pull every last trick out of the bag. He's appealing to the court of public opinion because he's getting brutalized so badly in courts of law.
Faith Gay, what is the best legal advice to Donald Trump right now on this particular case? Is there any reason not to appeal the case?
Absolutely not. I mean, as I said, I think the judgment is pretty appeal-proof. There are so many witnesses. It's not just Michael Cohen. The judge went out of his way to say that Cohen's testimony was important, but it was corroborated by many others and many documents. But I think what we're doing right now, what he should be doing, is engaging in delay. He has an absolute right of appeal. He can go back in court and try to push the monitors and the compliance officers' duties, try to make them smaller. He can quibble about that in a way that may cause delay. And he can push his appeal to the highest court in the state. So I think just like with all these trials, his game is delay. He doesn't want a judgment, and once he gets it, he drags it out to the full extent of the law. And I will say New York will give him due process, like it gives every person from the lowest to the highest. He will get the chance to appeal once and maybe try to appeal again.
David K. Johnston, you've been studying Donald Trump's business for a long time. You've had some opportunities to talk to him about it in the past. How is he feeling tonight?
Oh, Donald will go to his grave insisting that I have a perfect company, I did everything right, but he knows internally that they've got it, and he doesn't have any mechanism to cope with it. As a child, he didn't have to be held responsible for anything, and so he has, as the judge said, a near pathological need here. To Donald, a lie that would trouble you and me, and I don't mean telling your 4-year-old that there's a Santa Claus, it is of no consequence. It doesn't matter just so long as you get the money, and suddenly now he's got to pay out the money.
David K. Johnston, Tim O'Brien, Faith Gay, Suzanne Craig, can't thank you enough for tonight. This was the ideal panel I needed to hear from. Thank you very much for joining us on this important night. Thank you. Coming up in Georgia today, we did not see Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis return to the witness stand, but her father, John Floyd, a former attorney, took to the stand, retired attorney, took to the witness stand to defend his daughter, and that is the testimony you really need to see. He was the star witness today. That's next. The second day of the hearing in Fulton County, Georgia, about the Trump co-defendants' motion to disqualify District Attorney Fani Willis from the case began as Andrew Weissman predicted it would begin. Because Fani Willis's lawyer decided not to ask her any more questions, that meant that the Trump team of lawyers did not get another chance to ask questions of Fani Willis, and so she gave no more testimony today. Andrew Weissman predicted that would happen because it appeared from the Fani Willis side of the case yesterday that she had established everything she needed to establish in that testimony yesterday, and there was no reason to continue it. Then Fani Willis's lawyer called 2 witnesses in support of her testimony. The first witness was the former governor of Georgia, Roy Barnes, who is a highly experienced trial lawyer. He impressed everyone in the courtroom on both sides. He testified that Fani Willis offered him the job of special prosecutor in charge of the case against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. His testimony refuted the Trump team lawyer's claim that Fani Willis hired her boyfriend, Nathan Wade, for the job of special prosecutor so that she could then go on vacation trips with Nathan Wade and profit from his spending on her through the paycheck that she was giving him. That is the Trump team lawyer's theory of the case. Now that the testimony in the hearing is over, we can say that there was absolutely no evidence presented at all that Fani Willis intended to profit from Nathan Wade's position or that she incidentally profited from that position in any way. Zero evidence for the fundamental reason that this hearing was held. Fani Willis and Nathan Wade both testified that their romantic relationship began after Nathan Wade began working in the district attorney's office. Here was former Governor Barnes' testimony about why he didn't want the job of special prosecutor that eventually went to Nathan Wade. He didn't want to be the special prosecutor of the man who tried to overturn the presidential election in Georgia and sent a violent mob to attack the Capitol on January 6th.
I'd lived with bodyguards for 4 years, and I didn't like it. And I wasn't going to live with bodyguards for the rest of my life.
So the terrorism of Donald Trump and his mobs worked in that particular instance. There was shocking testimony in the late afternoon today when Terrence Bradley, who was Nathan Wade's law partner and was the first lawyer involved in handling Nathan Wade's divorce, took the witness stand and testified that he did have communication with the Trump team lawyer who filed this motion against Fani Willis. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came on cross-examination by Fani Willis's lawyer, who revealed why Terrence Bradley might have been in contact with one of the Trump team lawyers.
You left the firm. The firm remained the same as far as other employees, Mr. Wade, Mr. Campbell, as the named partners of the firm. You were the one who left, correct?
That is correct.
And you termed it as a disagreement. You recall answering questions as though you left due to a disagreement. Yes?
Yes.
And that disagreement was that there was an allegation of sexual assault by an employee made against you, correct?
That is incorrect.
There was not an allegation that you sexually assaulted one of the employees in the firm.
That is incorrect, but yes. Yes.
Yes, there was an allegation that you sexually assaulted a member of the firm, correct?
Yes, there was an allegation, yes.
Did you sexually assault any clients of your firm?
No.
Never?
Never.
Who's Anna Rodriguez?
I don't even know that name.
You don't recall a client named Anna Rodriguez?
Anna Rodriguez? No, I do not.
Never met her?
I do not recall the name Anna Rodriguez.
The next witness the state would call would be Anna Rodriguez. Question, Mr. Bradley, about the sexual assault of Ms. Rodriguez, a client of the firm.
The judge did not allow that testimony by Anna Rodriguez, saying it was too far afield from the point, the essence of the hearing. The most impressive witness of the day was the man who helped make Fani Willis who she is, her father, John Clifford Floyd III. He is a retired attorney who practiced law in Washington, D.C. and around the world, including working in South Africa with Nelson Mandela and working for 4 years in Rwanda. Fani Willis's father testified that he moved in with her in the summer of 2019 when Fani Willis had a boyfriend who was a DJ who was frequently at her house. That conflicts with the Trump team lawyer's claim that Fani Willis began dating Nathan Wade in 2019. Fani Willis's father said he never once saw Nathan Wade at their home and never met him until this year. Mr. Floyd explained why his daughter had to move out of the house.
There have been so many death threats and they said they were going to blow up the house. They were going to kill her. They were going to kill me. They were going to kill my grandchildren. I mean, on and on and on. It just, it became, and I was concerned for her safety.
The people who were threatening to kill him and his daughter and his grandchildren are the supporters of the clients of the lawyers who were all facing him in that room today, some of them questioning him. When the lawyer representing Donald Trump questioned Fani Willis's father, he handled the questioning, her father handled the questioning, as gracefully and as professionally as former Governor Barnes did. There wasn't even a hint of anything but professional respect that attorney John Clifford Floyd III showed to his fellow attorney, the lawyer for Donald Trump, the man who has called his daughter a racist, the man who has never, ever told his supporters not to threaten her life and not to threaten her father's life and not to threaten her children's lives. Because of security precautions now in place, Fani Willis's father doesn't get to see her very much anymore.
I've only seen my daughter 13 times because I can't, and we've never seen each other more than maybe 3 hours because of, you know, the nightmare threats against her and me.
Yesterday, Fani Willis testified that her father always advised her to make sure she always had enough cash on hand to deal with whatever surprise might come her way.
Your Honor, I'm not trying to be racist, okay? But it's a black thing, okay? You know, I was trained, and most black folks, they hide cash or they keep cash. And I trained, you always keep some cash because I've been places, and just because of the color of my skin, for example, I took a fellowship at Harvard when my daughter was just if I might, Your Honor, if I might, when I was just, she was just, you know, maybe 3 years old. And I remember going to a restaurant in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I had a American Express credit card and maybe a Visa or whatever. And I had a lot of what they call traveler's checks. I don't even know if they still have traveler's checks, but traveler's checks. And there was a sign said, you know, with the credit card. For whatever reasons, the man would not take my American Express credit card. So I pulled out my Visa card, and he wouldn't take my Visa card. So then I pulled out my traveler's checks. He said, we don't take checks. Now, these were traveler's checks. This was money. I had a $10 bill. I'll never forget this as long as I live. And he said, the bill for my wife at the time, Fani's mother, Fani and myself, was like $9.95, and I had a $10 bill. That was all that. And I always remember that. But even before that, I've always kept cash, you know, and I've told my daughter, you keep 6 months worth of cash always. For example, I had 3 safes in my house. I put some of my clients' stuff there too, things I didn't want other lawyers to be, I mean, because you're always in a firm, and I knew that there were special conditions. So some of my clients' things I would bring home, put them in the safe. But I've always kept safes. And as a matter of fact, I gave my daughter her first cash box and told her always keep some cash.
Joining us now from Atlanta are Katie Fang, an attorney and host of The Katie Fang Show, Saturdays at noon Eastern on MSNBC, and MSNBC legal analyst Melissa Redmond. She's a former Fulton County, Georgia Deputy District Attorney, and she's a professor at the University of Georgia School of Law. And Melissa, let me begin with you on what we just heard from John Floyd, Fani Willis's father. How do you think the judge received that testimony?
I think Mr. Floyd came across as incredibly credible. He corroborated what the DA said. He explained why he said it, why he gave her that advice. It resonated with a lot of us who have the same advice from our fathers based on their lived experiences. Whether or not Judge McAfee had a context at the time DA Willis testified yesterday of why she would keep cash on hand and cash in her house, I think that was cleared up by her father today. And I don't see any reason for Judge McAfee to question his testimony. I do believe the defense is going to argue that this witness was prepped ahead of time, but that's, of course, different from being coached. Of course, as the attorneys, they would want to know how he would respond to the questions. They would know that DA Willis and Mr. Wade said that he was reimbursed in cash and that she was advised, or she had always been taught to keep cash, and could he corroborate that? So all those are questions that would normally be asked in the course of preparing for this hearing, though I do suspect the defense is going to try to turn that around to say they somehow colluded and got their testimony together beforehand. But I do believe it was credible, and I believe Judge McAfee will find that testimony credible.
Katie Fang, huge surprise when Attorney Bradley was on cross-examination today, where they brought out the issue of sexual assault, and that's the reason he left the law firm where he's
direct examination, because the fact that it was brought out on cross-examination made it seem as if Terrence Bradley, A, had something to hide, and B, meant that he wasn't going to be credible or he wasn't going to be truthful. Now, why is that important? Because Terrence Bradley, even though he's the former defense attorney, or excuse me, divorce lawyer, for Nathan Wade, Terrence Bradley's credibility, just like all the witnesses that have been put under oath and testified before Judge McAfee in this evidentiary hearing, it is going to be weighed by the judge when the judge makes a decision. Because as evidence, that is the only thing that is there in terms of the form of the testimony. Arguments by the lawyers, that's not evidence. The filings that have been done, not evidence, which is why it's crucial. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism, Lawrence, about the fact that Judge McAfee even had this hearing in the first place, but that threshold was met. The hearing had to take place because that's what the rules of the law require. But ultimately, McAfee has to make a decision based on evidence only. It can't be swayed by any type of prejudice or biases that he even has as a judge. And he has to rely upon the evidence. And it's severely lacking, if not non-existent, for the defense at this time.
All right, we're going to squeeze in a quick final break here. We'll come back with more on the situation in Atlanta with Katie Fang and Melissa Redmond. We're going to be right back.
Somebody sprayed, again, the B word and the N word on the house, and I don't think my daughter even knew that. I cleaned it off and called the police, and South Fulton police, they have, I'm sure, all the records of all the things that happened.
Back with us, Katie Fang and Melissa Redmond. And Melissa, today I kept wondering, and I don't know if you have an answer to this, if the judge is to find in the defendant's favor and disqualify Fani Willis, he would say, I'm doing this because I believe who is it? What's the testimony here that the judge has to believe and can believe to make a ruling like that?
He would have to find that DA Willis and Special Prosecutor Wade were not credible in their testimony, either about when the relationship began or that they split expenses roughly evenly as they testified, such that she never received any benefit from the vacations that the defense has alleged create some type of personal interest such that it impacts why she's pursuing this case. So when you think about how convoluted that is, that they're lying about when the relationship began, and because they're lying about when the relationship began, they're lying about how they split expenses, which even if they didn't, somehow created a personal interest in the prosecution of this 19 co-defendant RICO case that took 10 years to investigate, months to present to a grand jury. That's what he would have to find.
And Katie, we're all sitting there waiting for when we could feel a burden of proof has been met. I mean, they didn't even meet what they set out in their motion here in the first place, where they were saying that they cohabitated. The testimony is they never cohabitated. And so there were things even in the motion that was able to get them this hearing that they couldn't establish.
Yeah, and that good faith was lacking, Lawrence. And trust me, the state called out the lawyers on the other side for it. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this is the reason why we had an evidentiary hearing. Again, it has to be evidence. It can't just be wild allegations that is set forth in a motion. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm going to really quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time to go through it. They allege that Fani Willis specifically awarded the contract to Nathan Wade. Well, we heard from Roy Barnes today that, in fact, she went to Roy Barnes first before she went to Nathan Wade. They said that she's had private financial gain. No, we've heard that she paid her own way and she did not have any private financial gain. They said that she didn't appoint the most qualified person. Judge McAfee said, we're not even going to deal with qualifications because that's not an issue. They said that she doesn't protect the public interest. I don't know about you, Lawrence, but a RICO indictment with 19 co-defendants sounds like the interest of the public is being protected. And last but not least, they kept on saying that she had a financial interest. Where's that financial interest? Zero evidence that's been provided that would say that her financial interest has been realized. In fact, Roy Barnes himself said, too, this job as special prosecutor, you don't make enough money here. And by the way, all the other special prosecutors in this case, Lawrence, they're getting paid the same day rate as Nathan Wade. Remember, Lawrence, who brought this motion? It's Michael Roman. He's an opposition research specialist for the GOP, and that's the reason why you saw the salacious allegations in the first place.
Katie Fang, Melissa Redmond, thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll be right back. You can hear more about today's hearing from Katie Fang on The Katie Fang Show tomorrow at noon on MSNBC. That is tonight's Last Word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.